You know exactly what this feeling is. You wake up, and before your eyes have fully adjusted to the light, before your feet have even touched the floor, it is already there. That low hum, that invisible weight pressing down on your chest. Not pain, exactly. More like dread. A kind of static that fills the space between your thoughts and won't let you rest. You lie there, and your mind begins its morning inventory. What if this goes wrong? What if that falls apart? What if I said the wrong thing? What if I'm already too late? And so it begins. Another day of living inside the storm of your own head. You scroll through your phone, not because there is anything important to see, but because the scrolling dulls the noise for a few seconds. You have conversations with people who love you, and somewhere in the middle of a sentence, you realize you have not heard a single word they said. Because you were there, still in that place, still running calculations, still trying to anticipate every possible disaster so that none of them can catch you off guard. You tell yourself this is being responsible, being prepared, being realistic. But somewhere, in the part of you that never lies, you know the truth. This is not preparation. This is suffering. And you have been doing it for so long that it has started to feel like a personality trait. You are someone who worries. You are someone who carries everything. You are someone who cannot fully exhale. Not really, not all the way, because you are always waiting for the next thing to go wrong. Here is the question no one has asked you yet. What if the problem is not the things you are afraid of, but the fact that you have never been taught the difference between the things you can actually change and the things you were never supposed to be holding on to in the first place? What if the reason you are exhausted is not because life is too hard, but because you have been fighting battles that were never yours to fight? This video is for you who lies awake at 3 a.m, rehearsing conversations that haven't happened yet. For you who spends enormous amounts of energy worrying about outcomes that are already out of your hands. For you who would describe yourself as anxious, but secretly suspects that something deeper is happening, that the anxiety is a symptom, not the disease. Today, we are going to do something unusual. We are not going to talk about how to think positively. We are not going to tell you that everything is going to be okay. That is a lie dressed up as kindness, and you have heard it enough times to know it doesn't help. Instead, we are going to draw a line. A line that divides the world into two territories, what you can control and what you cannot. And we are going to study, with unflinching honesty, what it costs you to live on the wrong side of that line. Because here is the thing that the Stoics understood 2,000 years ago, and what Carl Jung confirmed through decades of depth psychology: the human psyche does not break from suffering. It breaks from suffering uselessly, from carrying weight it was never designed to carry, in the direction of a problem it was never going to solve. You are not broken, but you are exhausted, and today we begin to change that. Before we can talk about what you can control, we have to be honest about what is actually happening inside you when things go wrong. Because here is something most people will never admit to themselves. You do not just worry about problems. You become the worry. You let it move into your nervous system and rearrange the furniture. You give it the master bedroom and sleep on the couch. The ancient Stoic philosopher Epictetus was born a slave. He had no money, no freedom, no rights, no certainty about tomorrow. And yet he became one of the most internally free human beings who ever lived. His entire philosophy rested on a single distinction. There are things that are up to us and things that are not up to us. What is up to us is our opinion, our intention, our desire, our response. What is not up to us is everything outside the boundary of our own mind. Other people's opinions, illness, death, loss, the decisions of others, the weather, the economy, the past. Most of us live as though this distinction does not exist. We pour our finite energy into controlling the uncontrollable, and we wonder why we feel depleted. Carl Jung described this dynamic in psychological terms. He spoke about psychic energy, the inner resource that powers everything you think, feel, and do. It is not unlimited. And one of the greatest wastes of psychic energy he observed was what he called enantiodromia, the exhausting oscillation between trying to control what you cannot control and collapsing in despair when it refuses to cooperate. Think about the last time you were truly freaking out. What did it look like? Maybe it was anxiety, that buzzing, spiraling, overthinking state where your mind refuses to stop, where one what if becomes three, and three become 10, and suddenly you are catastrophizing events that have a own in 10,000 chance of occurring. Maybe it was avoidance, burying the problem under distraction, procrastination, the pretense that if you do not look at it, it will somehow resolve itself. Maybe it was anger, that hot white energy that feels like power in the moment, but always leaves you worse off than you were before. Or maybe it was sadness, that slow, heavy sinking that drains you of the will to deal with anything at all. These are not character flaws. They are not signs of weakness. They are the predictable responses of a mind that has been given an impossible task, to solve what cannot be solved, to control what will not be controlled, and has started to break under the weight. Here is what no one tells you. Every freakout costs you something real, time you will never get back, energy you needed for something that actually mattered. Relationships worn thin by the constant broadcast of a crisis that never fully resolves. You have a finite reserve of what you might call your freakout funds, and every time you spend them on something that was outside your control from the start, you walk into the next real crisis running on empty. The question is not whether you have been doing this. You have. We all have. The question is, are you ready to stop? But here is where it gets more complicated, and more important. The reason you struggle to separate the controllable from the uncontrollable is not simply a lack of awareness. It runs deeper than that. You were taught, subtly, over years, by a world that rewards the appearance of control, that worrying is responsible, that anxiety is just what it looks like to care, that if you let go, something terrible will happen, and it will be your fault for not holding on tightly enough. Carl Jung was direct about this. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Think about that. The beliefs driving your anxiety are not conclusions you reasoned your way to. They are programs installed so early in your life that you mistake them for truths. The belief that everything depends on you. The belief that if you relax your vigilance for even a moment, everything will fall apart. The belief that you have to earn your right to peace by first solving every problem, satisfying every person, and anticipating every disaster. These beliefs are not serving you. They never did. Let me tell you something that perhaps no one has had the courage to say to you directly. Most of what you are worrying about right now will never happen. And the things that do happen, the real crises, the genuine losses, the storms that cannot be prevented, you are less equipped to handle them because you have spent all your reserves on the ones that were never going to arrive. There is a woman named Sarah Knight who spent years living in New York, high-achieving, highly organized, always on top of every plan. Then she moved to the Dominican Republic, a place where nothing goes according to plan, where the weather changes without warning, where the person who said they would come tomorrow might come next week, or maybe never. And she discovered something that changed her life. The people and places that would not cooperate with her need for control were not the problem. Her insistence on controlling them was the problem. She came home one night to find a tarantula, the size of a honeydew melon, waiting on her doorstep. Her instinct was to burn the house down. Her response, instead, was to breathe, to ask, what can I actually do here? To recognize that the presence of the tarantula was not something she had control over, but her response to it, that she owned completely. This is the distinction that changes everything. And here is what we will explore now. Because understanding the problem intellectually is not enough. You have to learn a new way of meeting the moment when everything inside you is screaming that you should panic. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Let us go somewhere darker for a moment, because the stakes here are real, and you deserve to understand them fully. The truth is brutal. You are not just wasting time when you spiral into anxiety about things outside your control. You are practicing a relationship with reality that is making you worse at the very thing you are trying to do. Live well, decide wisely, show up fully for the people and projects that matter to you. Jung described the shadow, the parts of ourselves we push into the unconscious because we cannot accept them. One of the most common shadow contents in people who struggle with anxiety is helplessness, the deep, terrifying recognition that you are not in control of life, that people you love will die, that you will fail sometimes, and be hurt sometimes, and be powerless sometimes, no matter how much you plan or worry or prepare. The freaking out is, at its root, a refusal to accept this truth. It is the ego's attempt to construct the illusion of control through the performance of concern. If I worry about it enough, I have done something. But you have not done something. You have just suffered. And here is the cruelest part. The more you resist the reality of impermanence, the more you insist that you should be able to control outcomes that belong to life, not to you, the more you paradoxically tighten the grip of anxiety. Because anxiety is fed by the gap between what you expect and what reality delivers. And if your expectation is that you can control everything, then reality will disappoint you every single day. There is also something you may not want to hear about how this affects the people around you. When you live in constant crisis mode, when every day brings a new emergency, a new worry, a new problem that requires the sympathies and attention of the people who love you, you begin to deplete something in those relationships, not because they do not care, but because human beings have a limited capacity for crisis. And when that capacity is exhausted by anxiety about things that are unlikely or uncontrollable, there is nothing left for the moments when you genuinely need support. The goodwill of others is a resource, and you spend it every time you broadcast panic about things you cannot change. When the real storm comes, and sometimes real storms do come, you need people standing beside you with energy to spare. This is not a judgment. This is a consequence, and it is one you can change, but you have to be willing to see yourself clearly first. Most people stop here. They feel the discomfort of this recognition, and they retreat. They go back to the familiar pattern, the worry, the spiral, the exhaustion, because at least it is known. But you have made it to this point in this video for a reason. You are ready to understand something different. Here is where the real shift begins. Every spiritual tradition, every school of practical philosophy, every branch of depth psychology that has genuinely helped people navigate the chaos of being human, all of them, without exception, return to the same fundamental move. Can you control this? That is it. That is the question. Deceptively simple, radically transformative. The Stoics called it the dichotomy of control. Epictetus built his entire philosophy of freedom on it. The Serenity Prayer, known across recovery traditions, is nothing more or less than an elegant expression of this same insight. The wisdom to know the difference between what can and cannot be changed. But let us get specific, because in the abstract, this idea is easy to accept. In the moment, when your heart rate is up and your thoughts are racing and you are staring at the problem right in front of you, it is much harder. Here is a framework for practicing this distinction in real time. First, acknowledge the problem. Not resist it, not catastrophize it, not pretend it does not exist. Simply name it. Be specific. The enemy of anxiety is specificity. Vague dread is infinite. A named problem has edges. I am worried about my job security. I am afraid this relationship is ending. I don't know how I will pay this bill. These are real things. They deserve real attention, not the blur of generalized panic. Second, run the question. Ask yourself honestly, not with the distorted lens of fear, what in this situation is actually within your influence? Notice, not just within your complete control. There are also things under your partial influence, things you can affect but not determine. Your behavior in a conversation, the quality of your work, whether you apologize, whether you make the call, whether you seek help. These matter. These are yours. Identify them. Third, accept what remains. This is the step that most people skip, rush, or resist. Acceptance is not passive. It is not defeat. Acceptance is the act of placing something in its correct category, outside my control, so that you can stop spending resources fighting it and start spending them on what actually responds to your efforts. Jung's concept of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming more fully and authentically yourself, always involves this reckoning with the parts of reality that will not bend to our will. The mature psyche is one that has learned to hold both. I will act where I can act. I will release where I cannot. This is not a one-time insight. It is a practice that begins the moment you choose to ask the question, instead of simply reacting. And the remarkable thing, the thing you will discover when you begin to apply this with consistency, is that the clarity of knowing what is yours to do produces something you may have forgotten was possible: relief. Not because the problem is solved, but because you are no longer fighting on every front simultaneously. Because you have drawn a boundary around your responsibility that is honest rather than infinite. Let me give you something practical. Because philosophy without application is beautiful and useless, and you deserve something that actually works. The first principle: sort before you respond. When something goes wrong, when the panic rises, when the what-ifs begin to swarm, do not react immediately. Give yourself a moment to sort. Think of it like a meteorologist looking at weather patterns on a radar screen. Not every storm on the screen will hit your location. Some are highly unlikely. Some are possible but remote. Some are approaching fast and need immediate preparation. And some, the ones that are genuinely out of your hands entirely, cannot be stopped, only survived. Ask yourself, how likely is this thing I am afraid of to actually happen? Most of what we call anticipatory anxiety is at its core a confusion between possibility and probability. The fact that something could happen does not mean it is likely to happen, and spending enormous reserves of energy on a only an 1,000 outcome is not wisdom. It is a particularly exhausting form of magical thinking, dressed up as responsibility. The second principle: invest in what actually responds to you. Once you have identified what is within your control, even partially, act on it, concretely. Not in your head, in the world. The body needs action the way the lungs need air. When you are anxious and you take one small, real, concrete step toward the problem, making the call, writing the email, asking for help, booking the appointment, something in your nervous system settles, not because the problem is solved, but because you have moved from the paralysis of imagined control into the reality of actual agency. Jung spoke of directed thinking, the kind of focused, intentional mental engagement that solves problems, as distinct from mere rumination, which is undirected thought that circles endlessly without arriving anywhere. When you catch yourself ruminating, the question is not, how do I stop thinking about this? It is, what is one thing I can actually do? One thing, not everything, one thing. The third principle: let the rest go, and understand why this is not weakness. To release what you cannot control is not to abandon care. It is not apathy. It is not giving up. It is the most sophisticated and courageous response available to a conscious human being who understands their own limits. The Stoics practiced a daily meditation called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. They would imagine in advance the things that could go wrong, and they would ask, if this happened, what would I do? What would remain in my hands? Not to spiral into catastrophe, but to recognize, in calm moments, that they would survive, that life would continue. That response, not prevention, was always the real source of their strength. Carl Jung called the process of consciously engaging with what we cannot control active imagination. Not fantasy, but a real dialogue with the parts of experience that do not bend to our will. When you sit with what you cannot change, when you allow yourself to feel its weight without trying to wrestle it into submission, something shifts. The thing you were terrified of becomes smaller, not because it is less serious, but because you have stopped running from it. The fourth principle: treat your emotional responses as information, not instructions. When you feel anxious, it is not a command. When you feel afraid, you are not required to obey. Your emotions are signals, real, valid, important signals, but they are not the whole truth. They are one voice in the room, a loud one, but not the only one. Think of it this way: your emotions are like puppies let loose in a room. They are full of energy, impossible to ignore, and they will not calm down until they have been acknowledged. You do not have to act on every impulse they generate. You acknowledge them: yes, I see you, I feel this, and then you gently set them to one side, while you engage the rational, functional part of your mind that can actually solve the problem. This is not suppression. This is sequencing. Feel first, then think, then act. The integration of these two, the emotional and the rational, is what Jung was pointing to when he described the goal of psychological development. Not the elimination of feeling, but the development of a self large enough to hold both: the anxiety and the clarity, the fear and the function, the grief and the decision. You are capable of this, more capable than you know. There is a prayer that has been spoken for centuries, in hospitals and prisons and living rooms and church halls and 12-step meetings and private moments of despair. It is not affiliated with any single religion. It belongs to anyone who has ever been brought to their knees by the weight of things they could not change. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. 3 sentences, an entire philosophy of survival. What makes it powerful is not the serenity it asks for, it is the wisdom. Because the courage and the serenity both flow from the same source, the ability to see clearly, to draw the line, to know which battles are yours and which ones never were. You have spent so much of your life trying to control the storm, trying to hold the clouds still, trying to prevent the rain by worrying hard enough, planning enough, caring enough, anticipating enough. And you are tired, not broken, tired, because no one told you that there was another way, that you could stand in the middle of the storm, not fighting it, not denying it, not drowning in it, and simply ask, what is mine here? What can I actually touch? That question is yours now. The storm does not stop, but you do not have to run from it anymore. You do not have to be destroyed by it. You do not have to spend every remaining ounce of yourself trying to make it go away. You accept what you cannot change. You act on what you can. And you begin, slowly, imperfectly, honestly, to get on with your life. That is not giving up. That is growing up. That is the beginning of a kind of freedom that no amount of control seeking has ever been able to give you. Now I want you to do something for me. Write in the comments below, I release what I cannot control. Not because it is already true, but because saying it publicly, even here, even in a comment section, is the beginning of making it true. Because the mind takes seriously what the mouth declares. Because naming a commitment is the first act of honoring it. Write it. Let's see how many people in this space are ready to begin. And one more thing, whatever you do not stop here. The next video is not just another piece of content. It is the next step on the same path you have just chosen to walk. It is part of the same process that brought you to this video in the first place. Something in you knew to click. Something in you was ready. Don't let that readiness go to waste. The next video is already waiting for you. It's important, much more than you imagine. See you there.